And as I was looking at the sacrifice that we made, it really paled in contrast to the sacrifice that the three men that we're looking at today made to answer their Christmas invitation that they received. They actually made a bit of a longer trip from Babylon to Bethlehem, and their road trip was about 8,000 hours round trip. And we're going to be looking at these three men, and you may have guessed that this is the three wise men of Matthew chapter 2. And if you got your Bibles, open it up to Matthew chapter 2, please. And you'll notice that in your bulletin there's also an outline, so you can grab that outline as well at this time. And as we look at the story of the three wise men who came to visit Jesus, I have to say in advance that much of it is a mystery, but the big message that comes through from the visit of the wise men is the main point that's at the top of your outline, and that main point is that an invitation to Christmas is an invitation to worship. That's what we're going to see throughout this entire passage, that the invitation to Christmas is an invitation to worship. Some of the characters in this story are going to respond in different ways to this invitation to worship. But at its core, this is an invitation to acknowledge the greatness of Jesus and bow the knee in worship. Let's begin reading at the beginning of chapter 2. This introduces some of the characters or the guests on the Christmas party guest list. He says, now after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of King Herod, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, "Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we have seen his star when it rose, and we have come to worship him." Now the guests on the Christmas guest list in Matthew chapter 2 here are the wise men, and the wise men, I call them from yonder. And these wise men are veiled in mystery for sure. Actually, I spent many hours studying this passage and trying to understand some about these wise men, and I have more questions afterwards than when I started. But we can know some things about these first guests to the Christmas party. One is where they're from, and there's some details about where they were from, or some hints about where they're from. The first one is that they came from the east, and they came to Jerusalem. They came from the east. And what is east of Jerusalem? Like half the planet is east from Jerusalem. So this description of them coming from the east is not exactly the best clue of where precisely they came from. Actually, there is something that's a better clue in the text about their identity and their origins. Sometimes you know these guys are called wise men or three kings, or a little bit stranger term called magi. And that term magi is the clue to where they actually are from, because the term magi, which is what Matthew actually uses, this is a very regionally specific term. It's like the word lutefisk. Right? This is a regionally specific term. If you're invited to a Christmas celebration with lutefisk, where are you going? Right? It's regionally specific. You're likely going to downtown Paulsbo, possibly the Sons of Norway building. It's very regionally specific. And just like that, the term magi is very regionally specific, and it refers to a group of people within Persian culture that likely were around the area of Babylon. So when we think of the trip that the wise men took, I said it was 8,000 hours round trip because they were traveling from really far away. They were traveling from not just outside of Jerusalem or outside Israel, not just outside, they're traveling from outside of even the Roman Empire. And when we think of first century biblical history, we usually think of stuff going on within the Roman Empire, but they were even outside. They were in a neighboring rival empire, the Parthian Empire, probably out there in Babylon. So we see these guys traveling probably at least 6 months to get from Babylon to Jerusalem. These guys were making a significant commitment and a significant sacrifice to answer this Christmas invitation and come to worship. Now, I want to ask the question, what did these wise men know that motivated them to make such a long trip just to come and see this baby that had been born in Israel? And this remains very mysterious as well, the full details of what motivated these wise men to come. But from what they say, when they arrive in Jerusalem, we can see some hints of what they did know. It says that the wise men, when they arrived, they said, "Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star when it rose, and we have come to worship him." So some of what they know, we can't really explain from an understanding of the Old Testament or from Jewish theology. Some of what they know, and especially related to this mysterious star that they saw, they understood it represented that it was going to show them the directions to go and visit Jesus. This remains a mystery. What the origins of this star is, how they learned about this star. This is part of the mystery of the wise men. How they knew that Jesus was born, had been born already, that's part of the mystery of what the wise men knew. But there's also parts of what they say that they would have known very naturally. And as wise men, they were scholars, they understood religions, and they understood the religions of Babylon. And one of the present religions, a minority religion of Babylon, was Judaism. And the Jews had been there in Babylon since the exile. They had a long history. They had 500 years of history in Babylon. And so the Jews and these magi would have had access to the entirety of the Old Testament scriptures and what the Old Testament scriptures promise about this king who was going to be born. So they knew about this Messiah. When they come saying, "We've come to see the King of the Jews," they and Herod and the scribes and Pharisees all know they're talking about the promised Messiah of the Old Testament. So when we think of what the Magi's knew that motivated to make this long trek to come worship this child, we can assume they at least knew the basics about the identity of Jesus that Matthew began his book with. Before the genealogy of Jesus, Matthew lays out Jesus' identity as the Christ or as the Messiah, and then identifies him as the son of David, the one who was promised to come and rule on the throne of David forever. The Magi would have known this basic truth about the Messiah, that he was the forever king. They would have known that the Messiah was the descendant of Abraham, this promised descendant of Abraham, that God said through him all the nations of the earth would be blessed, that this Messiah, this king, would not just be a local king, but his influence and his blessing would spread to all nations, way beyond Jerusalem, beyond Israel, beyond the Roman Empire, all the way to where these guys were from. They would have known much about this Messiah. having the scriptures and then having this supernatural mission given to them to go and worship the Messiah, I'm sure they would have dug deep and tried to learn as much as possible before embarking on this long trip about the Messiah. I am sure they would have read the passage from Isaiah chapter 6 about him and understood that this king was no ordinary king. Isaiah chapter 6 that tells us that this child would be born, and to us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulders, and his name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. They would have known this promise that the increase of his government and peace would have no end, that on the throne of David and over his kingdom, he would be established to uphold it with justice and righteousness from this time forth and forevermore. They would have understood the magnitude of who Jesus is, of Jesus' identity. They would have understood from their own hometown prophet from way back, Daniel, this promise of this king who was more than a mere human. This king that Daniel describes in chapter 7 when he says, I saw in the night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven there came one like the Son of Man. And he came to the Ancient of Days and was presented before him. And to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all peoples and nations and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion, which shall not pass away, and his kingdom one that shall not be destroyed. The wise men had access to all of these Old Testament passages describing and promising the coming of this king like no other. This king who the nations would serve. That people like them from outside of Israel, outside of the previously restrictive covenant community, these Gentiles from all around the world would come and be part of his kingdom. And the wise men, knowing this, I think the wise men just wanted to be first in line. They wanted to be first in line of those peoples of the nation to bow down, to acknowledge the supremacy of King Jesus, and to give him what he deserves, which is worship. That's what the invitation to Christmas is all about. This is an invitation to worship, and this is an invitation that the wise men accepted excitedly. What they knew for sure is that Jesus was a king like no other. He was worth dropping everything for, and he was worthy of their worship. Now, this is a first place where we can look to the wise men and we can follow their example. They understood in detail the greatness of King Jesus, and they let that drive them, as it should, to worship. This is the first point on your outline. And this is to recognize your king. Jesus' identity demands worship. This is the first thing for us, and that's really what we are committing ourselves to during this Christmas season, is deepening and broadening our understanding of the identity of King Jesus so that it then enhances our worship. Even just from the passages that Mark has taught us in that first chapter of Matthew, we've seen amazing things that demand our worship of Jesus. We've seen already that he's the forever king, that he is the rightful heir of all creation. He's going to rule on his throne forever. As we enjoy eternity under the blessings of God because of Christ's sacrifice for us and bringing us into the family of God, we're going to enjoy eternity under his kingship. That demands our worship. He's the one who saved us from sin by taking the penalty for our sin upon himself 2,000 years ago on the cross. He is our king who died to rescue us, his servants. That demands our worship. And we even learned that Jesus is Emmanuel, the Creator God come with us. that our God loved us so much that he saw us in our helplessness, he saw us in our need, and he came to rescue us. All these things about Jesus and who he is, when we recognize our King, it demands our worship. Now, the wise men were great Christmas guests, and we affirm their honor of the King and the worship that they bring. Now, as the introduction continues, there are a few more guests introduced, and they're not the best Christmas guests. They're the ones that show up and they walk their muddy shoes on your carpet, and this particular guest is the worst of them all, and his name is Herod. And Matthew points out that the wise men showed up in Jerusalem in the days where a guy named Herod was in charge. And Herod was the king, allegedly, who was in Jerusalem. So this is our second guy on the guest list. And we know much more about Herod the king. Herod the king, I want to call him Herod the Helpful Great. He was called Herod the Great. I think he probably gave himself that title. And it looks like as the wise men come in search of Jesus, that Herod is being extremely helpful. When he hears that the wise men are in town and they're looking for the Christ or the Messiah, Herod gathers the chief priests and the scribes and asks them, okay, hey, I want to help out here. Where's the Christ going to be born? And then when the wise men do come and Herod informs them about where Jesus is going to be born in Bethlehem, Herod tells them, hey, guys, go find him. And then when you find him, come back and tell me so I can worship too. And Herod's self-presentation is very helpful. And that's because Herod is a snake. And what we see actually in history and in the narrative, that Herod is a heartless, homicidal king. We see that in even the history of Herod's family tree. And if you should be glad you weren't born into Herod's family. For example, Herod was so worried about people taking his power, taking his authority in Jerusalem, that he kills off two of his sons because he's paranoid they're trying to take over. And you would think his wife would not be very happy about that, and you're right. And he actually kills her as well. This is the Herod that the wise men are coming to. This guy is a horrible homicidal maniac. The kids that he produced that survived, we also see them in the Bible. There's some more Herods, and his grandson is the Herod that cut John the Baptist's head off and also participated in the trials and crucifixion of Jesus. His son, and then his grandson is the Herod that persecuted the church in the book of Acts and ends up having James, the brother of Jesus, killed. So this is a bad guy with a bad family, and we can say 100% in this story, Herod is the villain. And in our text this morning, we won't see the fullness of it, but next week, Mark is going to go into Herod's bloody response to the birth of Jesus, this massacre, later in the chapter. Now, Herod, it calls himself the king. He's identified as the king in Jerusalem, but actually Herod is not a Jew at all, and he's really not a king. He is a puppet of the Roman government. He was appointed as king over Jerusalem, and he does the will of the Roman government. That's about as close to a king of the Jews that he gets. But he got that name, he got that official title as the King of the Jews, and I don't know if it was an honorary title or a condescending title, but history notes that Herod himself was called the King of the Jews and the officially appointed King of the Jews. Now, what do you think? How do you think Herod, the appointed King of the Jews that kills anybody that threatens his power, responded in his heart and mind and emotions when he was told these foreigners, these foreign emissaries have come from the Parthian Empire, and they have gifts and they're looking for the King of the Jews, and you're not it? Herod predictably responds in insanity. And in the text, Matthew simply describes it as Herod being troubled. And he says that Herod, the king, when he heard this, was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. And we know why Herod was troubled. Because there is now a competitor king who he needs to eliminate. And I suspect all of Jerusalem was troubled because they know when Herod gets jealous, heads start to roll. So this is a moment now where all the shutters in Jerusalem close, and nobody wants to even say a word about this king that's been born in Bethlehem. Now, in order to figure out what's going on and where he can find Jesus so he can get rid of Jesus, Herod calls in the religious leaders. It says that Herod assembled all the chief priests and scribes of the people, and he inquired of them where the Christ was going to be born. So we have enter stage left, a third group of guests to the Christmas party, and this is the leaders of God's people, and they're described as the chief priests and the scribes of the people. And these are the guys that are committed to Judaism, are supposed to be leading the nation spiritually. They're supposed to know God and know God's word, and so he calls them in. And we know 100% that Herod is a villain of the story, and as the leaders of God's people enter in, we wonder, do we have some heroes here? Are we finally going to have some great guests to the party? And he calls them in to find out the location of Jesus. And Matthew tells us that the priests and the scribes told Herod, in Bethlehem of Judea, for so it is written by the prophet, and you, O Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for from you shall come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel. So they come in, and they know the answer. They know about the Messiah. They know about the details about the Messiah. These seem to be men of God. When they arrive, they know the trivia answer. The trivia answer is, where is Jesus born? Bethlehem. Yes, they knew the Sunday school trivia answer, but even beyond that, they knew God's word. They knew their Old Testament and the promises of the Old Testament. They knew that the prophet had written, and they were able to give us a paraphrase of what had been written, this prophecy about the Messiah. And they even knew of the King. They knew of Jesus. They knew of the promised one. They knew that he was going to come and he was going to do great things for them and their nation. And we wonder, are these guys going to join the wise men and rush to Jerusalem to see King Jesus? And as we know the story, they don't. They seem to align themselves with Herod instead of King Jesus. And the way that they describe or they explain to Herod the identity of Jesus leaves a lot to be wondered. And as I was looking, I was wondering about the things that they left out in their description or their paraphrase of this passage, and they hit the trivial high points of the prophecy in Micah chapter 2, that he would be born in Bethlehem, he'd be a ruler and a shepherd. But notice how much they left out about the greatness of King Jesus. It's like they just give the bland trivia, but they leave out the majesty of actually who King Jesus is and what he was coming to do. Listen to the actual Micah passage, and there's some ellipsis in it, but just hear the majesty and power of the Messiah. It says, "From Bethlehem shall come forth for me one who will be a ruler in Israel. His coming forth is from old and from ancient of days. He shall stand and shepherd his flock in the strength of Yahweh, in the majesty of the name of Yahweh his God. And they shall dwell secure. For now he shall be great to the ends of the earth. Your hand shall be lifted up over your adversaries, and all your enemies will be cut off." This is the actual flavor of the Micah passage about the power and the majesty and the mission and the superiority of this king. And as they present this prophecy to Herod, they leave out a lot of very important details. They know all this. They know this passage like the back of their hand. And you would think that knowing the power of Jesus, the power of the Messiah, the mission of the Messiah, the superiority of the Messiah, that they would say, I'm all in, let's go. Sorry, Herod, you're done. Let's go, we're with the Messiah. But what we see from the leaders of God's people, who should have been first in line to worship the Messiah, is instead of going to see Jesus, they say, let's go home. This is the last that we see of them in the story. So with this announcement of the arrival of the long-awaited Messiah, the religious leaders, the leaders of God's people, actually respond in surprising, disappointing apathy. This was their response to the announcement of the arrival of the king. So we have these three different groups, these three different guests with three very different responses to the announcement of Jesus. The religious leaders respond with apathy. Herod responds with aggression. And the wise men, the only ones with a wise head on their shoulders, respond to Jesus with adoration. Now, I wanted to think through what it was the difference. Why did they respond in these different ways? And was it something about their knowledge? Did Herod not have enough information in order to respond correctly to Jesus? Or did the religious leaders they didn't understand what was actually happening? Was it something with their knowledge? I would say probably of the group, the wise men had the least amount of information available to them. It wasn't about what they knew. It wasn't about what they understood. Their response to Jesus flowed out of what was going on in their hearts. And in the hearts of both Herod and the religious leaders, their hearts, we see, were filled with pride, greed, and selfishness. For Herod, he was willing to do anything to protect his throne. For the religious leaders, as we see it develop, they actually were willing to do the same. This is the same group of people, the same category of people who then, when Jesus comes on the scene in his ministry, they decide they're going to protect their position and their power. They're going to align themselves with Rome. They have no king but Caesar. They have the same things going on in their heart. It's pride, selfishness, greed. And I think for the religious leaders at this moment, self-preservation, that saving their necks from Herod was much more important to them than any prophecy of the Old Testament or any Messiah. So the difference in their response to Christmas was from their heart. Now, this is not a new thing. This is not a strange thing for humanity. This is always the dividing line between those who respond to God with worship and those who shake their fist at God. Knowledge is never really the issue. Romans 1:2, talking about everyone, all humanity that lives in rebellion to God, says that although they knew God, they didn't honor him as God or give thanks to them. But they became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Just like the Herod and the religious leaders, they knew enough about Jesus in order to respond rightly. It wasn't their knowledge, it was their heart. And their hearts were foolish, and their hearts were dark. And as a result, they refused to give him what he deserved. That's the greatest sin in response to an understanding of God, is a refusal to honor God and a refusal to give him thanks. This is the starting point of the downward spiral away from God, a refusal to honor God as he should be honored and to be grateful to God for everything that he's given us. A refusal to worship. Now, the wise men responded to the announcement of King Jesus in the completely opposite way. What we see in the wise men is a complete willingness to honor Jesus. We see their humility as they come to Jesus in worship, and we see their gratitude to Jesus. This is at the heart of the response to God that results in worship. This is what we want to imitate from the wise men, the things we want to avoid from the example of Herod and the religious leaders. We want to walk away having chosen our side. This is point number 2, to choose your side. And the difference, the dividing line is worship. Choose your side. Worship is the dividing line. Herod, religious leaders, those described in that Romans passage, Satan himself, they all know about Jesus. The difference is they refuse to worship. They refuse to bow the knee to King Jesus, to give him the honor that he deserves, to give him the thanks that he deserves, and to give him the worship that he deserves. Now, when we see the wise men arrive and worship Jesus, it says they fall flat on their face and worship him. And this is a very dramatic display of honor, of adoration to Jesus. And this is a legitimate expression of worship. But as we think about honoring Jesus, giving him what he deserves, and worshiping him, the New Testament is a bit broader on what it looks like to offer worship. And I want to offer this as a layman's definition of New Testament worship. And this is showing that God is more important than anything else in the world by what we say or what we do. It could be falling flat on our face. Because by doing that, we're showing God is number one. God is more important than anything else. But it could be by doing a lot of other things that the New Testament describes as worship. Things that we say when we're singing songs. We're saying things, proclaiming, declaring that God is the most important one to us. It could be through things that we do. And when we see New Testament worship presented and this call to worship Jesus because of his worthiness, we see that it encompasses all of our life, not just the words and songs that come out of our mouth, but everything that we do. Paul in Romans chapter 12 says, I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. This invitation to Christmas, this invitation to worship, is an invitation to show by everything we say and do that Jesus is more important than anything else. Paul describes some ways that we worship. He says we worship by not being conformed to the world, but we worship by allowing God to transform our thinking, to change our thinking by renewing our minds through God's word in order to discern and understand God's will. This is worship. This is a way that we show that Jesus is the most important thing, is we allow him through his word to change our mind and make our will match his will. He says, for by God's grace is given to me, and I say that everyone among you not to think more highly than himself than he ought. This is worship. To allow the greatness of Jesus to inform our self-understanding and create in us humility in relationship to him and humility in relationship to one another. And then he says, in that humility, then go and serve the church. This is how we worship and show that God is more important than anything else. The book of Hebrews has this very interesting passage on worship. And this is outside of the box for me when I think of what worship looks like. And he talks about Jesus' suffering and Jesus' rejection. He says, Jesus also suffered outside the gates in order to sanctify the people through his own blood. Therefore, let us go outside the camp and bear the reproach that he endured. For here we have no lasting city, but we seek a city that is to come. Through him, then, let us continually offer up a sacrifice of praise to God, that is the fruit of our lips, acknowledging his name. So we have this worship that is described as embracing reproach and shame and rejection because of our association with our King who was rejected and put to shame. As we associate with Jesus, he says this is worship. This shows that Jesus is more important to us than anything else. He talks about this offering up this sacrifice of praise, and this is the fruit of the lips that acknowledge his name, that openly associate with him despite the rejection that came to him and the rejection that might come to us as well. Open association with the crucified and despised King Jesus. This is worship. So the question that comes from this call of Christmas is, will you worship? I know you will come and you will sing songs. This is honoring to Jesus. It shows he's great. But will you willingly associate with Jesus even when it means rejection and becoming an outcast like him? Will you embrace this type of worship? This is the line in the sand. And we got to choose our side. And we by God's grace, are going to choose the wise place, and that is the place of worship. So even early in the text, we see all three of these parties choosing their side. This is only verse 5 or 6, and the wise men have clearly chosen their side as worshipers. Herod has chosen his side, and the religious leaders, unfortunately, have chosen their side as well. Now, at this point, Herod summons the wise men secretly and ascertains from them what time the star had appeared. And we know the star didn't appear yesterday because they had to travel 6 months from Babylon. Mark will illuminate all things regarding that next week. But Herod finds out when the star appeared, and he sent them to Bethlehem, and he says, "Go search diligently for the child, and when you have found him, bring me word that I too may come and worship him." Now, children, is this true or a lie? Herod says he wants to know where Jesus is so he can go worship Jesus. Truth or lie? Lie. Yes, he is a liar, and he sends them off to search for Jesus, and the wise men depart from Herod. And it says, after listening to the king, they went their way, and behold, the star that they had seen when it rose went before them until it came to rest over the place where the child was. And when they saw the star, they rejoiced with exceeding joy. So they headed out, and that star that God had used to supernaturally guide them from Babylon all the way to Israel now reappears to help them with the last part of the journey. And this is clearly a supernatural guidance mechanism, because it says that the star came to rest over the place where the child was and shows them exactly where they need to go to finally, after so much difficulty, navigating this long trip, making it through the deadly gauntlet of an interview with Herod, making it now finally to see the king that they came to worship. And he says that when they saw the star, they knew that they were finally there. They rejoiced exceedingly with great joy. And it's kind of hard to describe in words. Rejoicing exceedingly with great joy. He piles it on to say that these guys were jumping with joy. This was an amazing moment for them. Finally, they're going to see this amazing king. And they enter into the house, and they're jumping for joy, and the next thing that they do is they fall flat on their face in worship. It says, and going into the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother, and they fell down and they worshiped him. This is the worship offered by the wise men, and this is the worship to imitate. The heart of the wise men, this heart of worship, and this is the final point in the outline, to bow your heart. Bow the knee and bow the heart. The heart of worship includes joyful humility and sacrificial allegiance. And we see this in the worship that the wise men offer. And I know that is a mouthful, that the heart of true worship includes joyful humility and sacrificial worship. But we see that in the wise men, their joy upon their arrival, and then their humility upon entering. And we see a description of these three grown men, these scholars, these high-ranking officials from a neighboring empire. As they come in, they're now flat on their face in front of a child, giving him honor and worship. We see humility beyond anything we could have imagined. You don't see them doing this in front of Herod. They came in, they were respectful, they gave him a first visit as he would deserve as the ruler, but they come to Jesus and they understand the greatness of this little kid sitting in front of them. They worship him. They throw away any ounce of pride and hesitation, and they find themselves on their face worshiping Jesus. We see them also demonstrating sacrificial worship. It says that they opened up their treasures and they offered him gifts of gold and frankincense and myrrh. And these were gifts that were very valuable, and they were presented rightly to Jesus as royalty. And in a very Sunday school fashion, I could not resist but bringing frankincense and myrrh and fake gold. So they're back there on the table if you want to see some frankincense and myrrh and give it a sniff. Kids, make sure you stop by the back table by the treasure chest. But these were awesome gifts given by them in great sacrifice. And we see them bringing these valuable gifts, but this is just a small part of their sacrifice that they're making to come and worship. Remember, they left their homes 6 months ago. They knew their return trip was another 6 months. So they left their life for a year, funded their travel across dangerous territory. They put themselves on the line knowing who Herod was. They weren't ignorant about who Herod was and his history as a crazy ruler. They knew exactly who Herod was, but they put themselves on the line, coming and announcing their allegiance to King Jesus. These guys were worshiping with great examples of sacrifice. And then the final one is we see the allegiance of the wise men. And they were told by Herod the king, the guy who is in charge of the region, that when they find Jesus, what are they supposed to do? Go back to him, report back to him, and tell him where he is. But instead, these guys are warned about Herod's plan to kill Jesus in a dream, and what they do is they ignore what they were told to do by Herod, the ruler that they very well know doesn't like to be disobeyed, and they secretly go back to Babylon by a different route. They're willing to make themselves enemies of the state in order to demonstrate their allegiance to King Jesus. This is a little bit that we see from the wise men and their worship, their willingness to bow the knee and bow the heart to Jesus in worship, to give him this joyful, humility-filled, sacrificial allegiance. And this is where they become amazing examples to us. Now, there's much that we don't know about the wise men. They disappear just about as mysteriously as they arrive. But what we can learn from them this Christmas season is that truly an invitation to Christmas is an invitation to worship, is an invitation to recognize the King, to choose our side, and then to bow our knees and to bow our hearts in the worship that he deserves. Let's pray.